Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Wednesday, January 15th, and the international signing window, it is officially open. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter, and we had to bring in a reunion of sorts with Evan Christie of Gaijin Baseball because there is one man that we need to talk about, and that is Roki Sasaki. Evan, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Oh, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, really excited to dive into this because, of course, as we found out over the past couple days, the Toronto Blue Jays are one of three finalists for Sasaki. Very exciting to as that has developed over the past, couple days here, and maybe a little bit of surprise based on where the reporting had been leading into that. Of course, they are one of the three finalists was the San Diego Padres and Los Angeles Dodgers. So before we kind of dive into Sasaki as a pitcher, I just kind of want to get your thoughts on the Blue Jays as a finalist and what you think it means that or how they were able to kind of end up in this position.
Hmm. Well, when it comes to the Blue Jays as a finalist, we know this is not a case of driving up a price because in other free agents, sometimes people use the Blue Jays as a franchise that has a lot of money and is in a fairly big market that the some free agents will use to scare other teams. I don't think that's the case here because we're dealing with a set price, a set window. Yes, the Blue Jays have more money than say the Dodgers, but there's still no fear of this being run as a decoy kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, obviously, you know what, the money is going to be what it is. I think you want to be able to give them as much as you can. And of course, the Dodgers and Padres seem to have kind of given up on a few of their international free agents in the pursuit, and there hasn't been any reporting around the Blue Jays in that way. But it'll be interesting to see kind of how things
Yeah.
play out. I guess kind of looking at the three finalists. I mean, we can kind of zone in on the Blue Jays a little bit here, but what do you think? Makes the Blue Jays an attractive option for Roki and why they might have been one of the three finalists here.
I think the big thing is the training staff the Blue Jays have. How they have been able to keep a lot of pitchers healthy because that is the number one concern with Roki Sasaki. We are talking about a man who has never pitched a qualified season in NPB, and NPB is a much more regimented schedule than MLB. You have a lot more rest, um you have a lot more flexibility as a pitcher, and that was the biggest concern that everyone was looking at was how is he going to adjust to MLB? And we've seen that the Blue Jays have kept guys like Robbie Ray healthy. They've kept guys in general in a much better position, and that would be a much easier transition for Roki Sasaki because he's coming from an organization that has babied him. And when it comes to other organizations in the hunt, especially the Dodgers, the main concern is the Dodgers don't know how to deal with durability. They just run their pitchers into the ground. And that may not be something he wants.
Now that definitely makes some sense, and that's a compelling point you make there because the Sasaki workload stuff is kind of understatedly significant.
Yeah.
Is maxed out at like 110-ish innings or so with the Chihuahua Marines. It's been kind of a case where he just hasn't really pitched a major league workload. And you mentioned that he's been kind of protected, so to speak, by his
Mm.
club. But is this a durability question? Is this a guy that is going to be able to transition to Major League Baseball? Because there's no doubt the talent's there.
Mhm. There's no doubt the talent's there, and at the very least, he is going to be a high leverage reliever. At the very worst, his body breaks down, can't pitch a full season. A couple of years down the line, he becomes a closer. That's what people are saying is the worst case scenario. I think the worst case scenario is he absolutely destroys his elbow, but you never know. Um, when it comes to a team like the Blue Jays, I feel like they also give him more flexibility and a little bit more protection in the pitching lineup, a more consistent protection, which is what he had in Chiba. People don't realize that just because he's the only pitcher they may have heard of who played for the Marines, he wasn't the only good pitcher on the Marines. he had Kazuya Ojima and Atsuki Taneichi to keep him, kind of protected so that teams couldn't just focus directly on him. And I think the Blue Jays also have that as an advantage where you have to worry about a Kevin Gausman. You have to worry about um, other Jose Barrios, guys who are going to be legitimate concerns for your lineup and can take some of the pressure off Roki in a way that other teams don't have that consistent arm that the Blue Jays do because of injury concerns.
Do you think that wherever he ends up, he's going to have to be in a six-man rotation at least to start his career?
Oh, absolutely. Because you're dealing with new like Japan is all within one time zone. You're not dealing with jet lag. You're not dealing with super long trips. I mean, Roki didn't have to deal with the longest trip in his league. He wasn't playing for the Fighters or the Hawks who have to travel all the way across the country. He was centrally located. And while it wasn't the best position for him, the best position for him in terms of rest would be playing for one of the three Kanto-based Central League clubs where you're sleeping in your own bed about 60% of the time, um, as opposed to playing in for the Marines where he has like 50% home games and then you're also playing 20% of your road games about 30-minute train ride away. So that's not the case in North America. Um, even if, but playing in a place like the AL East or the NL West, those are two probably the best divisions for keeping him contained and keeping himself in the same time zone and limiting air travel in a way that would not, constantly mess up his schedule and training routine.
We've obviously touched a lot on kind of the transition and stuff, but I mean, we'd be remiss not to just kind of discuss Roki the pitcher, right? I mean, he's
Yeah.
it sounds like the most talented pitcher maybe to come out of Japan since you Darvish. I mean, I want to hear from you as someone that's obviously watched him quite a bit. What's his deal? What makes him so incredibly talented? We've seen flashes, we've seen highlights on Twitter
Yeah.
and so forth, but what makes Roki Sasaki so exciting, and what's his kind of story?
It was the velo and the pitch mix that we'd never really seen before. I wouldn't quite say he's on Darvish's level, but when he was on, he was on. Like in 2023, the man had a FIP minus of 26, which is utterly, absolutely ridiculous. He broke the FIP scale for like a month after the start of the season, but sadly couldn't parlay that into a full 143 innings. Uh, when it comes to Roki, the pitcher, how he started out, he was obviously had the tragedy of losing his family in the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, uh, which also is part of the reason why he has decided to buck tradition, burn a lot of bridges, and upset quite a lot of people by doing what he is doing right now. In that he is impulsive, he knows life is short, he knows he wants to get that opportunity done as fast as possible. And quite frankly, I understand the thought process, but he is also has to make this decision in a way make a decision in a way that's smart and can hold out long term because he's not really going to get that golden parachute if his body breaks down in the same way that pitchers like a Masahiro Tanaka, who is, struggling to stay in the major league lineup, but also got to deal with the Yomiuri Giants to try and get his 200th win. He doesn't have that luxury of leaving on good terms. As much as the Marines have tried to say, oh, we let him, it's very clear their hands were forced and they are not happy about it. So to go right now and do what he's doing right now, he fully has to 100% believe in himself, and he does. He does have the self-confidence, but he's also a guy whose confidence can get rocked really quickly. We saw that last year in a game against the Fighters when he had the worst game of his career. Pitchers don't typically get emotional in a way that is, forward and out there in Japan, you often see a very reserved kind of view in the dugout. He was fucking livid. He was upset. He was not happy with himself. And that is the kind of pitcher that I guess they're not really used to or haven't had to deal with in about 30 years, you know? A guy who is supremely talented, supremely headstrong. I guess like if I were to compare him to an NPB pitcher in the past, it'd be Nomo. That'd be the guy who I'd very much compare him to in terms of skill, talent, personality. And well, guess who Nomo works for, you know,
That's
in that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good transition because I did kind of want to get into some of these other finalists. Obviously, the Blue
Mhm.
Jays are there, but I think getting into what would be attractive to Roki for with the Dodgers and the Padres is also important because obviously they
Mhm.
have things that the Blue Jays don't, right? The Dodgers have the most recent World Series. They have Shohei Ohtani. They have Yoshinobu Yamamoto. They have the development system that,
Mhm.
obviously everybody loves to talk about. They have everything there. And then the Padres have, more recent success than the Blue
Mhm.
Jays. They have Yu Darvish. They have potentially a different media market, and I do want to get into that with you as
Mhm.
well. But let's start with the Dodgers because I think, they have kind of long been the favorite, and so much so that Roki Sasaki's agent Joel Wolf has been or
Yeah.
had to like turn down notions that they already had a deal in place with the Dodgers.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to get your thoughts on, what is it going to be about the Dodgers, or what might there be about the Dodgers that just makes this so easy for him to pick them if he does end up landing on in LA.
The biggest thing for him that the Dodgers have, once again, is that media success, but that is a double-edged sword. And the biggest problem that Roki has had, again, is that he does not like dealing with the media. He has never liked dealing with the media. He also doesn't like the big media market. We saw this in the 2019 NPB draft. He was interviewed by all 12 teams. Some of the big market teams, like the Swallows, could really have used pitching. That was the biggest issue they ever had, and they didn't pick him. And that was very key. Obviously the Giants, the Dragons, and the Hawks were not going to pick him because he wanted to go to MLB, and they're very anti-posting. So that was never going to work, and they knew that and went, all right, well, we'll go grab who we can. But it was really telling that the large market teams like the Hanshin Tigers, the Oryx Buffaloes, and the Tokyo Yakult Swallows did not take him. And it gets to this point where I think everyone who thinks he's automatically a Dodger doesn't really understand his mindset. And we saw that a lot with his interview process, where he specifically said in the initial pitch, I do not want players in the room. He said that to the Cubs, do not bring Seiya Suzuki. He told the Dodgers, do not bring Shohei or Yoshinobu. He told the Padres, do not bring Darvish. I want you to give me your pitch. And I think that leads to this idea of he is going to go to the place where he is the most comfortable. The Dodgers have a lot of disadvantages in that space because he's not a big city kid. He's a small town boy. And well, I won't say Toronto fits that because Toronto is a huge media market. Toronto is also a media market that the US tends to put down and disrespect and not really care about too much. We saw that a lot when the Blue Jays were announced as a finalist. Everyone thought, oh, of course the Blue Jays are a finalist. He's never going to go there. In that general view, well, I don't know if he will because Toronto media, at least when dealing with the Blue Jays, has tended to be a bit more lenient unless a player has done something awful. I don't think we have to worry about that with Roki, very soft-spoken, introverted young man who isn't going to like cause trouble. I don't think we're going to see um a media market that could, shake his confidence or piss him off here. which is not the same as some other people. Like if we were playing hockey, yeah, he'd never come here in a million years, you know, because of how the Toronto hockey media is. But Toronto baseball media is a little bit more, you know, I don't want to say passive, but a little bit more refined.
Yeah,
And
that's interesting that you kind of note that, because
yeah,
the Dodgers, obviously it's a, you know, a worldwide phenomenon at this stage.
yeah,
So this notion that he's not interested, potentially it's just not his personality, is not
yeah,
to be in the limelight. And of course we heard from him saying as much. That I guess lends some credence to the Blue Jays inclusion. But obviously the Padres kind of have that similar situation too, right?
yeah.
They're not the same enormous market in the way that the Dodgers are. So what differentiates the Jays from the Padres then?
It's a lot of personally, it's the staff. Once again, like I told you about the staff that would maintain his durability, would be able to. They also one thing the Blue Jays have as an advantage, and again, throwing back to media, they own the major media company that, you know, that covers them. They're able to better deal with things like the Padres are going to get whoever gets him is going to get swarmed with media. Whereas and while the Padres have they have Hideo Nomo in their coaching staff, they have Yu Darvish, who is his mentor. They don't have the ability to shield him as much, especially with the way that ownership is going on right now. They have bigger problems, with the Seidler family fighting over the team at this point. That I think that what the Blue Jays have over the Padres is that sense of stability and that sense of control that a lot of other teams don't have. And it's not like they're the only large market team that controls their own media, but we saw it with the Yankees and we saw it with the Mets that he didn't want to go there. He didn't want to leave that. So us being the only East Coast city that he is considering is significant.
This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode.
With the, you mentioned Nomo and Darvish being with the Padres, and obviously, we talked about Shohei and Yoshinobu being with the Dodgers. I wonder if you can touch on like maybe what his relationship is with each of those guys, and how much you think that relationship could or those relationships could play into his decision making here.
Um, his relationship with Shohei is, from what I understand, sort of close. They're both from the same part of Japan. They're both have a generally a similar story and a similar ambitions. Shohei's not the problem. It's Yamamoto. That would be the whole point because they didn't hate each other, but they were rivals. They didn't, you know, talk after games. They weren't a big, talking point. So they weren't like two guys who you'd put in the same room together all the time in a friendly way, often compared to each other. And he would probably not want to be in a place where he constantly has to compare himself to Yamamoto, being on the same team. I mean, the one time that, because I watched the game in person, the one time they faced off in Japan when it was a Marines Buffaloes game, which a game I was at, he was a bit of a different animal in that game. He was pitching hard. He was obviously the cameras were at, like, everyone was tuned into that game. That game was a packed on a Wednesday night, which is something you don't really see, especially in a place like Marine Stadium, which is a little bit hard to get to. The place was absolutely, thronged. And he pitched with this sort of intensity that I didn't really see him pitching, like when he was pitching against, some other high caliber arms like Hiromi Ito on the Fighters or someone else like that, or even the one or two times I think he went up against Sengo once in 2020, but like you didn't see that same intensity. So I think Shohei's not the problem. It's Yamamoto. Does he want to separate himself from Yamamoto, or does he want to continually go back into Yamamoto's shadow? Whereas with the Padres, he has a much better relationship with Yu Darvish. Darvish very much during the World Baseball Classic took him under his wing, made sure that he was, respected him, taught him certain pitches, taught him to deepen his arsenal, which is something he started using in 2023 and 2024 to great success. Darvish also has the ability that, he doesn't really use a translator as much as he, used to. Darvish speaks completely fluent English with barely any accent. So he's very much more of a guy who can, go over to, essentially be a big brother to Roki in a way. That is the point where the Blue Jays have a problem because we don't have Yusei anymore. We have guys like Gosuke Kato, who played in Japan, who's in the front office now, but they don't have that mentor figure, and that could be a benefit as well. Because you have to remember there was a period of time where every NPBer was automatically a Mariner, including Shohei. Everyone thought Shohei was going to go to the Mariners. That was what everyone thought. Shohei specifically chose to go to the Angels so he did not have to live in the shadow of Ichiro and Hisashi Iwakuma and guys like that. I don't know if Roki's going to have the same mindset, but I think he does not want to be um he does not want to be in a place where he's constantly compared. And that is something that the Blue Jays have in that, he's not, in the same division or even on the same team as a Yoshinobu Yamamoto or Shohei Ohtani. We shall see. It's very
Yeah.
much we're dealing with mind games of a person who I'm not in Roki's head. I don't know how the he thinks, but I'm using, other examples of what we've seen and, evidence of who he has turned down, like the Mets, him turning down was a big one. He turned down the Orioles. I don't think he even had a meeting with the Phillies. In that case, the Phillies were like, "Oh, we want him," and then Roki was just, eh. I mean, Roki met with the White Sox, but that was because of James Dyke. That was a favor to James Dykstra. Because we also have to thank James Dykstra for putting him on to the Blue Jays as
Yeah,
well.
I did want to bring that up because I know you kind of had the viral tweet there in December, bringing up that Roki had asked James Dykstra for his opinion on the Blue
Hmm.
Jays. Kind of adding on to that, I mean, what do you think that Roki Sasaki has heard about the Blue Jays, whether that be from Dykstra or just kind of from the general consensus on the Blue Jays or the general familiarity with the Blue Jays in Japan?
I think he's heard that this is a competently run organization, which fans will say things about that. I mean, yeah, like any Blue Jays tweet will be fire Shatkins and all that stuff like that. But it is a organization that tends to not rush its players. It tends to not you know put too much pressure on their players, especially when even when they're struggling. Like we saw that with Bo Bichette last year. Bo Bichette had an awful year, but the Blue Jays still kind of let him try and work out his issues on his own. Also finding that I believe when Dykstra was with the Jays, Schneider was managing.
I think he might have
I'm
been a
not,
little bit before
or
Schneider, but probably, Schneider's been around, so
yeah,
definitely would have been in the same dugout with him for sure.
yeah, would have been in that area and have an insight into him as a player. I mean, like when it came to Roki, he was asking all of his former teammates what, all of his MLB teammates what they were like what the organizations they played for were like. We know he was very close to Leonis Martin, which may be another reason the White Sox got some, love because of, the Cuban connection with the White Sox and how everyone uh like about the only people who want to play for the White Sox right now are Cubans. because of their history with Cuban players going back to Minnie Minoso. But I feel that once again, um, I feel like he has a pause. What while the general view from the Japanese public of the Blue Jays is what it is, um, the like the obviously because he keeps meeting with them, the perception that Roki has of the Blue Jays is a good one. You know, he has an idea of what they're like. I mean, we don't know when everyone's posting the clip of him working out at Petco Park in Padres gear, we don't know if when he worked out with the Jays, he was working out in Jays gear. So we shall see how this goes, you know?
So among all these kind of questions,
Mm.
the biggest one I guess is when is when will
Yeah.
he sign?
When will he sign?
He's open to, or excuse me, he's available to sign today. The window is opened, has
Mm,
until the 23rd,
24th,
24th, excuse
23rd
me,
or
to
23rd,
either
24th.
way,
I don't either
he's
way.
able to
Yeah.
sign within roughly a week.
Yeah.
So if you were to, be a betting man, when would you
Hmm.
expect him to sign?
21st, 21st or 22nd. He's gonna let it come down to the wire. I mean, we saw other players let it come down to the wire, like Hye-sung Kim let it come down to literally the last 24 hours before he signed with the Dodgers. I feel like he is going to take his time. He's already, narrowed it down from I think like 12 teams that he had interviews with down to three. Um, there is a little bit of a rush with the looming deadline, but I don't think there's too much of a rush as of like he needs to sign right now, right now, right now. And this may also be a play by his camp as well to um see who like how badly each team wants him. Because as of right now, every day that these three teams are waiting for him, they are letting the guys who they have looked at out of the Dominican Republic and Venezuela and all that stuff. They are letting them walk to other teams. I mean, one guy's who the Dodgers were looking at has already signed with the Pirates. This may be a play from his camp to see how much they want him. This may also be a case of a bit of a letting Roki make his decision now that the pressure is on. We shall see. I'd say the 21st. I believe Francis Romero when he said the 21st because he's gotten a bunch of things right before. Once again, I don't have someone in his camp. I couldn't tell you.
It should be interesting over the next week because obviously teams can acquire more international free agent spending space. So
Hmm.
I wonder, kind of as the next few days unfold, if we see, the Dodgers trading for space, or the
Hmm.
Blue Jays or the Padres, right? And I'm sure, if that were to happen, the sirens would go up, the flares
Oh
would go
yeah.
up, it'd be mass hysteria
Hmm.
as that kind of happens. But
Yeah.
kind of as the next few days unfold, it kind of seems, he's had probably multiple meetings with all
Hmm.
three of these teams, outside of, potentially these clubs maybe trying to elbow their way into a little bit more money. Is there kind of anything else that they can do, in your opinion, over the next few days to kind of better their standing with
Hmm.
Sasaki and his camp?
Keep in contact, but don't rush him. The big thing is I think if a team says like, come on, just sign already, you're out. You know? Um, I think that the best thing they can do is keep an ear to the ground, keep in contact, and but don't try and force the issue. Even in the incredibly because there's the incredibly minuscule chance that this lapses and he's back in Chiba next year. He has a backup plan. He doesn't have to sign with you. He has a fallback, and he knows that. You know, as much as he may have burned some bridges, the Marines would take him back in with open arms in a second. He always has a home. So the pressure is on these organizations to finish their pitches, make their pitches even better, but don't think he doesn't have to, like, don't think he, has no fallback plan other than you. He has a fallback plan. He has, like, he has been posted. He is not a free agent. When that posting period lapses, if that posting period lapses, he's back in Chiba next year. So,
Well, it's interesting
yeah,
that you mentioned this idea that teams shouldn't be all over him because
yeah,
the Jays have been reported to be among the three
Pushing the
remaining
hardest.
pushing the
yeah,
Pushing.
hardest is the word, right?
yeah.
So do you read anything from that?
I read it from the fact of like this desperation because the Jays have been this eternal bridesmaid team where they know they are a distant third. So they are throwing caution to the wind. You know? They're like, you know what? We are probably the ones who have the most to lose here if he doesn't sign and we lose some of our international promises that we've made that are illegal and you shouldn't make them, because, that's not how this system is supposed to work, but everyone does it anyways, Long debate about that because a bunch of people are saying, how Roki is screwing over a bunch of kids as of right, like bunch of Dominican kids right now. At which point of like, if you don't want to blame someone, blame MLB for freaking out when Otani got posted early. That was the big freak out moment that caused them to change the rules and bring it up to 25 because it used to be that if a player came from like the KBO or NPB, it was 23. If we were dealing this like 7 years ago, this wouldn't be an issue. He could sign for as much as he wanted and whatever. You know, the Blue Jays are charging hard because, hey, you know what? We know we're a distant third. We know that nothing. If this comes to nothing, oh well, everyone's gonna make fun of us, but at least we tried.
Yeah,
Which
I
has been the
mean,
motto
it's
for Blue Jays for the last few years. Hey, we tried, man.
hang the banner. They
Otani's on.
were
Otani will be on a plane
finalists.
to. Yeah, Otani will be on a plane to Toronto tomorrow. Don't worry about it.
I mean, it's funny that just kind of looking
Yeah.
back at kind of this whole situation with
Mhm.
Sasaki. I mean, it's a 23-year-old with ace potential, and
Yeah.
he's coming in at a major league minimum salary. So it's a
Yeah.
guy that I know when
Mhm.
Joe Wolf met with reporters kind of in late December and said that
Yeah.
20 teams had submitted
Yeah.
their pitches. It's kind of surprising that why wouldn't
That we're.
all 30 have, because it's
Yeah.
everybody can afford them and everything like that, but
I think it was because I think a lot of teams realized like we have no shot in hell. And I know some teams got pitches and didn't even get interviews, like the Phillies. The Phillies were uh I think the Phillies front office was baffled that he didn't, show up to them, which I think kind of made it funnier and it makes it kind of more interesting that the Blue Jays do have this shot. But, if he's turning down a team that is legitimately like the Phillies are a powerhouse. As much as we still kind of reel on them and we don't consider them to be the primary threats in the NL East, that being the Mets, the Phillies are still a powerhouse team. And for him to turn them down is significant.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
even grant them a
definitely.
meeting.
It's
Yeah.
it's been a heck of a process. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's been interesting and gonna be exciting to see kind of how the last week comes out. Evan, you've been really generous with your time, and
Yeah.
we really
No,
appreciate you
noise.
taking the time
Yeah.
to do this. I'm gonna put you on the spot before we let you go. Where is Roki Sasaki gonna sign?
I think Roki Sasaki will be a San Diego Padre.
All right. There it is. I mean, you know what? If he's not a Blue Jay, I feel like him being
Like
a Padre
Padre
is
would
is
be,
is is a
yeah.
fair consolation, and we can all kind of be satisfied with watching him pitch in front of Fernando Tatis and Manny Machado and all those guys.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
um, yeah, I'm fine with that prediction. If we had told me that like a week ago, would have been totally been fine. So,
Yeah.
that's all right. But
See, you have this dangerous thing called hope.
it's the hope that kills you, right? But
Oh yeah.
it's what
Yeah.
keeps bringing us back as sports fans. So,
Yeah.
so Real exciting, but Evan, yes, great stuff, man. Really appreciate you doing this. Evan
Thank
is
you.
at Gaijin Baseball on Twitter. He is at Gaijin Baseball on YouTube. Check out his stuff there. It's really great. Evan, I'll let you plug your channel before you go.
Yep. So I'm at Gaijin Baseball on Twitter and Blue Sky. Blue Sky I only really post signings, but because Blue Sky is Blue Sky, and I'm still kind of navigating how that is. I talk about current event on Twitter and Instagram. I talk about current events, and I shit post every now and again. I focus a lot on historical content on YouTube, talking about the history of NPB and Asian baseball and more broadly in general. Um, and Gaijin baseball anywhere. I've probably locked up the username. If I haven't locked up the username, I'll tell you. I don't have a Twitch yet. Yet.
Not yet, not yet, but yeah, yeah, great stuff, man. Really appreciate that. Always enjoy kind of keeping up with your content and
Thank
enjoy
you.
yeah, following all your insight on Japanese baseball and NPB and everything like that. So
Thank you.
appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Well, that is Evan Christie of Gaijin Baseball. Once again, make sure to follow him on all social platforms and on YouTube. As far as the Bird's Eye View podcast, you can find us on YouTube. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching there. You can find us at the Bird's Eye View podcast. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I'm at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEB_pod. Thank you so much for listening.